So in attendance are Commissioners Matari, Duncan, and Brooks. Are there changes to the agenda? Okay, public comment. All right, item 1, introduction of Facilities Director Jeff Voeller. So he's been with us, this is his 3rd week, and I just wanted everybody to see the name and the face, and so when you guys have issues, you can reach out, and right now the process is still the same, the email address and all that to get, well, you guys have your own thing. So
Do we get to hear a little bit about Jeff, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, my name is Jeff Voeller. Happy to be here. My background, I came from the Kootenai School District. I was there as the Director of Operations for the last 6 years, and saw this opportunity and decided to make a shift over to the county and looking at your needs and the growth, and I'm excited for the opportunities ahead, and was able to tour the Sheriff's Department and the jail yesterday and learn about the jail pod expansion that you guys are doing and looking at that project and Kootenai North, and you know, there's a lot of growth and a lot of opportunity, I think, with the county, and so I'm excited to be here. And I've been in this area for 22 years. My wife is a director at the Kroc Center, so very well plugged into this community, and been here a long time.
Thank you, and of course you're welcome to stay, but if you have other things to do, we understand, so.
Let's stay for a while.
There's Dr. Duke. Dr. Duke, we just introduced Jeff Voeller, our new facilities director. So, Jeff Voeller, our facilities director.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes. Nice to meet you.
All right, now we can move on to Kootenai Member Health and Wellness Clinic PMR update. I don't know, Sil, do you want to handle this?
So we have great news. Our clinic officially opens July 15th. Oh, sorry about that. So great news. Our clinic is opening July 15th officially. So at this time, staff can call or email PMR for appointments. Starting on Monday when it officially opens, you can go into their portal and actually schedule your own appointment. So great news, exciting, appreciate all the work done by Buildings and Grounds and everybody working on this project. It's been a project, but well worth it. Great benefit for our staff members, so, and their family members that take our health insurance. So, any questions?
Sylvia, will we be putting out an email, just reiteration of contact numbers and address for our employees?
Yes, so there's been about 2 emails that have gone personally to individuals that have our health insurance, and then I'm just waiting for PMR to give me an email that we can mass distribute internally that says we open July 15th. In a few days, everybody should receive in their personal email or whatever email you use for your health insurance that says we're open now, but we'll distribute that contact information for individuals through a countywide email.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you, Sylvia, for all your hard work on that.
Thanks.
It's been a couple years in the making. All right, item 3, workplace culture survey. Commissioner Matari had mentioned in one of the HR meetings, kind of inquired about why people leave Kootenai County. And so it was brought up during that meeting that we could do a county-wide culture survey. And Sylvia's got more information.
All right, so at the May 16th HR meeting, every month we cover open positions, and questions started coming up in terms of, you know, what are the reasons for our staff leaving, and how do we retain them, and what's driving them still leaving the agencies with the efforts we've made towards salaries. So in that discussion, we talked about, you know, our exit interviews, we get feedback, but we don't get 100% turnaround on our exit interviews. So we talked about doing potentially an employee engagement workplace culture survey. And we did find out that the county did a real formal survey back in 2013. They used a company, it it was LMM Leadership, I believe is the name of the company that was used for it. So we wanted to have a discussion with the elected officials to see your viewpoint on conducting a workplace culture survey. I think our goal ultimately is to retain our employees. As of today, we have about 102 openings, so we have a lot of work still to do. We've reached under 100, probably a year or so ago, and we've just been maintaining at 100 open positions. I did email the elected officials sample questions. This was just something Zach and I pulled together to start the dialogue with the elected officials on potentially doing this. And there's copies, I think, that are going around for each of you to look at. Zach, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so as we've been looking at staffing our county, the big challenge we're finding is the retention rate is creating this effect where we're losing people at the same rate that we're hiring people, roughly. So we've been right around that 100 opening mark, and the positions, there are certain positions that are more challenging, and those positions are kind of been persistently challenging. There are other positions though that come and go, and that's really become a retention concern because those positions are not difficult to fill necessarily, but we're finding that it's difficult to get employees to remain in their positions for any length of time. When we're looking at our exit interview data, it is fairly incomplete because we're relying on self-reported data. It's something that is optional for employees. They've already exited the county. And ultimately, those are county employees that have already selected to go. So it's not a matter of retaining them. Their information is only useful looking forward to potentially retain additional employees. The goal of doing a survey would be to peel back look under the hood to see, hey, is there something else that's going on with our current existing employees that we could do differently that would help increase that retention rate? Because until we can do that, it's going to be very challenging and very costly to continue to staff the county. So to do this effectively would really require the buy-in and the participation of the elected officials. And we would want this to be a partnership so that if you have ideas, if there's information that you want to receive from the team so that we can make improvements, we ought to do that, make sure we get that information.
And so I did pull our turnover rates, and I'm just going to give countywide numbers. In 2023, our turnover rate was 15.8%. We lost 135 employees. Of that, 89 gave us an exit interview or indicated on their exit letter why they were leaving. And our top reason was retirement. Second was personal. Third, career change, and then salary increase. And so then year to date from January through June of 2024, we've lost 65 employees. Our turnover rate at this time is 7.6%. If you doubled it, because it's half a year, we're trending at 15.2%. And currently, our top reasons are personal, career change, retirement, and moving, and then salary increase, and then it goes down from there. So
15%, does that include the retirement?
It does include retirements.
And back to the other numbers when we get your Thank you. Back to the original numbers when you did the breakout, did you get a percentage read on the different categories, or the different reasons for departure?
Yeah, so the different categories were, I don't know if that's the question you're asking. The reasons we have identified in our exit interviews when you fill it out is personal, career change, retirement, moving, salary increase, other, promotion. We do have a category for better benefits, and just recently we added one for the public defender's office that's transferred to an outside organization, because that turnover shouldn't look negatively for us, because that's a state mandate that those people are leaving.
So I'm a little confused on the numbers, because you just gave
And-
number one is being personal, but before that you said the major reason or the primary reason was retirement. So I'm confused.
2023, the major reason was retirement at 17% of staff leaving because of that, out of the 135.
And how do our numbers compare to like national numbers or?
We're actually trending better than nationally. I don't know our first 6 months, but I'll give you turnover rates overall for the county in 2022 was 20.6%. National average was 22.3. And then in 2023, our turnover rate was 15.8% and nationally 19.1%. So we're doing better than nationally, which is good.
Does that include private sector?
Overall, yes, everyone.
Do you have any numbers that
Wait a
compare
minute,
us
no,
to
it
other?
doesn't. It includes, no, it's everyone, yes.
Do you have any numbers that, so we could have a little better apples to apples comparison? Because normally when somebody leaves, especially after a certain amount of time, they become vested in Percy. And so
Yes.
that ties you in, where typically in the private sector, you have your 401k and you take what you put in with you.
Actually, let me rephrase that. It is government excluding schools is what that rate is.
It's all government.
All government excluding the schools.
Okay.
And that's what we've been doing for years, way before I was here.
Just out of curiosity, does anyone ever call some of these people who fill out these surveys just to kind of validate that, you know, they are answering the questions precisely enough so we can get to the root cause?
We have not, from an HR perspective, been doing personal interviews with these individuals or followed up with phone calls.
Yeah.
That's something we'd like to do. Based on our time constraints, we haven't been doing that.
Yeah, I think that that would be valuable to kind of get to the root sometimes, because people will say certain things on a survey, or they may not have the opportunity to say certain things on a survey. And sometimes just kind of talking with them, they'll open up a little bit and they might reveal something. Because I do think that we probably lost some people because there were years we didn't fund a matrix, or we didn't, you know, take care of some of the things that we were supposed to. And they may have said for other or things like that. And understanding how these events that have occurred prior could play a significant role in how we make decisions moving forward.
Absolutely.
If I can comment on that, Stan Mortensen for the record, I agree, but I think what should also be considered is maybe the department or the elected head over that former employee should be asked, because sometimes the people that work with these people know why they're leaving. And so when you get an employee who doesn't fill out the questionnaire, we know what that information is, even though they didn't fill out the questionnaire. And even when they do fill out the questionnaire, sometimes a coworker or the boss can provide some insight as to why they answered that, because some people think they might want to come back to the county someday. They don't want to burn bridges, you know, and then they're not going to be as forthright with that questionnaire. And some of the true reasons why they're leaving aren't going to be reflected in that questionnaire. And so I think the questionnaire is a good thing. I think we should take steps to verify the information, maybe with the actual person filling it out. But I think the office they left, the department head, their supervisor, they should be contacted as well, and they should be able to supplement that information that's being provided on that questionnaire, and especially when it's not filled out at all.
I'd
And,
like to echo Bela Kovacs, apologize. For the record, I'd like to echo what Stan Mortenson's saying. One of the things I try to do is reach out to every employee in our department that when they leave, I like to do an exit interview with them myself personally. They don't always agree to it, but that's validating what Stan Mortensen is saying. You do get some insights that way as well. So.
To speak to that briefly, there are many departments that do a good job partnering with us as employees are exiting, and often we get that kind of greater picture filled in for us from that contact with the department. It is inconsistent throughout the county. Some departments, we don't receive resignation letters. We don't get kind of any kind of forewarning to that end. So on that front, to help complete that picture, I would just ask that you reiterate with your managers that they send resignation letters, that they partner with us when there's an anticipated exit, so that we can help fill that out.
And on the status change form, I'll have to verify this, but I believe you can indicate, put a comment in there if you're aware of why they're leaving. And then we would look at their exit letter, their exit interview, and the status change form as to the reasons why they're exiting.
Will the results of this survey be made public or given to the electeds?
Absolutely. We need this partnership with all of the elected officials to make this work. And we really need to determine what our purpose is, what we're looking, what type of information are we looking for, and what are we going to do with it. In 2013, the former HR director actually did presentations to the staff and to the electeds. Of course, initially the electeds, what the survey results said, and then had sessions with where staff could participate as well. We just have to really determine and let people know that we're not just doing it as an exercise, that it's meaningful, and we're going to take the results seriously, and hopefully we can address some of the reasons why people aren't staying, and if they're staying, what they see as beneficial to staying with the county.
Duke Johnson, one point that I heard was the top 3 reasons, but if for example, retirement is number 1 and it happens to be a significant percentage, then that's actually a real positive. They stayed until retirement. So sometimes listing, having some idea of just the percentage in addition to 1, 2, 3 might be shed some light too. So.
Yes, and we do both. We have percentages by reason and the number.
Great.
Is this anonymous?
It would be anonymous. One of the things we would want to do is at least know, we could give them the option to put their name in, but we find that these type of surveys, people don't want to give out their name. Some will, and we would want to know what elected office it is, at least to that level.
Yeah, the only thing that kind of stands out to me with that is that there's a lot of abstract questions. So, for example, I have confidence and trust in my supervisor. Well, everyone has a supervisor, in essence. Mm-hmm. So, what is the standard? Because you're asking everyone different questions. They're asking everyone the same question, but their idea of confidence is different. And so, if we aggregate this information, what can we glean from it that would even be actionable? Because I would like to think that if we're going to do this, we should be able to get actionable information. And you could have one supervisor that has a lot of people reporting to them, or like in a recent meeting, we could have one supervisor with 2 people reporting to them. And if that one supervisor with 20 people reporting to them is, let's say, doesn't garner confidence, that will skew things a little bit. So how would we take questions that are very abstract and try to turn that into a actionable document for us to do something if, we have a problem?
Well, do you want to do that or do you?
So survey design, these being sample questions,
Yeah.
everything is up for grabs or changes. This is just purely a sample, but that's a great question because ultimately the survey design should be somewhat reverse engineered. First starting with what data do we want to be able to see at the end and evaluate. And so if we're focusing on retention particularly, we want to focus our questions on getting data that will allow us to take action on improving the retention rate. With this question, for example, with my supervisor, or I have confidence in my supervisor, this would be a more useful question the more granular we can get in the data. So that is really up to the elected officials to what level of granularity we can get. So I'll just use the sheriff's office, for example. If I'm an employee in the sheriff's office, our largest office in one, it's probably not going to be a super useful piece of information if I have a concern with my supervisor, because whether I'm in the jail or I'm patrol, that's two very large data sets. If we're able to drive down a little bit more granular, even finding out if this is a trend that we see in, say, the jail versus patrol, that would still help identify where there may be some training opportunities for these leaders to improve that metric and that confidence that somebody would have in their leadership. Also, then allows us to go in and maybe, with, of course, the elected officials' approval, start asking questions of employees and doing a pulse survey so get more information. This would just indicate potentially a hot spot where we could make a big difference if we were to focus on that.
Is this the actual survey that you're proposing, or these questions?
These are just questions.
These are just
We
started.
wanted it's to start the dialogue with the electeds, to see, these are the type of questions you would see on these surveys. We do have the questions from the 2013 survey we could align with and use as well. And it'd be interesting to see the results from if you modeled the same type of survey.
I think there's a relationship between the number of questions and the response rate as well. So, 22 questions. I know this is just kind of a shotgun. You're just giving them all out there right now. But how many questions do you anticipate the final survey will be?
Go ahead.
Number of questions is less significant than the length of time that the survey takes. And most survey design allows you to get an idea of what time commitment an employee would need to fill out a survey. So like yes or no questions are very quick to answer versus a free response question requires more time of somebody to make a response. We'd be looking at less than 5 minutes. So, and in truth, we don't want to take up a lot of time for people away from other responsibilities as well. But too short and you don't get enough data to make action. Too long and you're going to get a skew in the data from people not completing the survey or electing not to participate.
Jennifer, anything to add? All right. Bill? All right. So
I just find surveying very interesting. That is one of the things that I was very involved in at the University of Illinois, was constructing surveys and testing the validity of different surveying. So this is good to do, but I don't think we should get too wrapped up in it because it's quite complex. And when you hire a firm, some firms are better than others, just like anything else, but it's very difficult for the layperson to know what's better. We have to be very careful if we do that.
all right. So consensus is HR should continue down that path. Then?
I'm a little hesitant just simply because the rotating terms that we all have. The next Board of Commissioners, with its new dynamic, may or may not agree with the actual survey idea. So I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not enthusiastically supporting it.
I think it'd be better served just to get some employees that have left and get them in a room together like a focus group where they're already working somewhere else and they can speak freely. Because again, I'm not so sure, with the abstract nature, unless you can really drill down and you say, this is what we want to accomplish. There's an old saying, buyers are liars. And, they'll tell you what they want, but they end up doing something different. And, but the people who've left, those people can tell you the reasons why, with the exception of the retirements, which, is going to happen. But the ones who left for other reasons, I think that's where the answers would be more so than the people who are here. If I were to be asked where that priority would be.
I think to Stan's point, though, that you may get some people who don't want to cooperate just because they may intend to return to Kootenai County when things change. So may or may not be.
No, you can make the feedback anonymous. They can speak in a room with a third party and they just don't, their names aren't.
We could try.
Yeah, we're certainly willing to try.
Yeah.
I'm very impartial as to how we arrive at getting certain data. ultimately, seeing this retention rate improve, I think we can all agree would be a benefit to the county. It would be cost savings, and just retaining as much knowledge within the county is only going to benefit us. So however we do that, to me is secondary, but ensuring that we are able to take action on whatever we do choose to do is going to be important, because it has been shown very concretely that doing a survey and then not taking action actually demotivates employees. So what I don't want to see happen is we go through the efforts of doing this survey and then we look at it and say, well, that's interesting, and then we move on and don't actually follow up with it, because that will indicate to our employees that we didn't take it seriously.
Well, the only thing I would argue then is that, just the basic fundamental rules for keeping people are: one, do you have the tool sets necessary for them to do their job? Are you paying them properly for the job they're doing? Those are the big ones, and do you have a culture that promotes growth? If we're doing those things and we're still losing a lot of people, then I would argue we should probably dig in a lot more. But the things that I've seen is just we haven't kept pace with what paying people a rate to the point where we can attract new people to come in. So when people leave, the people who stay have to pick up the workload, and eventually at some point it creates a breaking point. That's what I've seen, but I'm fine with whichever way you guys want to go, as long as we have a good objective.
So what direction would you like HR to take?
It's all up to me.
I will go ahead and echo what you just said. If you keep it very brief, those 2 or 3 items that you mentioned, if that's the survey, go for it. See what we get. Because those are things under our control. As we all know, each elected official does things their own way, creating their own challenges and everything else. So if we stayed away from the soft issues and just, are you adequately paid? Do you have the support you need? Is there advancements? Just then go down that route, but keep it very, very narrow.
I'd like to add, one of the things I also have seen is alignment with values and missions. And so if we have clearly stated missions and values that people can get behind and identify with, I think that makes a difference. One of the things that I like to throw out there is I'd be interested in if the board would be willing to fund this so that each department could have its own version, because we all have different statutory objectives, different values, different missions, different objectives, and then tailor it to the individual department. I think if each department had its fund to work with, we could then make it more focused.
Yeah, I wouldn't support that at this time. I think it needs to be broader and needs to be county focused in general, because we can't make decisions operationally. Now, what I do is I give, I've done it twice now since I've been here for 5 years, is given all my department heads a survey, and it's completely anonymous and it's Rate the Boss. And so I've done that free and been able to get good feedback. So that's something that you can already do. That's not, it doesn't cost anything if you want something really department specific. So, but yeah, at this point, I just would like to hear what HR can find out, if they can narrow to those items mentioned and see if we can get something.
Okay. We can bring something back with some ideas of the focus would be, do you have the tools you need to do your job? Are you paid adequately for the work that you're doing, and growth? Do they have the ability to grow, and have they been afforded those opportunities? Something of that nature. We'll look at some more specific questions.
Okay, and I'd like to see
Simplify
the
it.
2013 questions, if you want to
Okay.
send those out.
Yes, I can, I'll scan it in and send it to all the electeds.
Great, thank you. All right, are we ready to move on? Okay. Item 4, proposed elected officials allocation of FY25 budget, and that would be Commissioner Matari.
Well, as the junior commissioner, sometimes when you are newer to a process, you can see things a little differently than when you've been doing something for a long time. And as we've been going through this budgeting process, I keep asking myself, why am I being asked to decide a line item for each of your budgets? It's your department, you know what you need, and yet here I am being asked, do we cut this $1,000 expense? What about this $1,500? And so what I'd like to do is just talk about looking at the budget differently. Another component with the budget is the fact that the Board of County Commissioners is tasked with the ability to increase taxes. But the Board of County Commissioners is not the one driving the growth within the budget. We're just the mechanism that can levy the taxes on this community. And so I think one of the things that we should be looking at is that based upon what your needs are, should be allocating what that tax increase is by elected. Now, the major advantage to that, and there's two ways that this can be argued. The first is, oh, you're just trying to pawn this responsibility off to the other electeds. But that's not true necessarily, because when you explain to the community where this money is going, and they're okay with it, they're okay with it. And so I think when you show where the money is going, who's asking for it and where it's going, you get much better buy-in from the community, because when they don't know where that money is going, they feel like it's being taken and not used appropriately. They just keep asking for more. Last year, when we did have to increase the taxes, I went around speaking to people in the community, and I explained to them that that money, almost all of it, went to paying our patrol deputies behind Coeur d'Alene Police Department. No one gave any pushback. And feedback that I've gotten from the sheriff, from his town halls and his coffee with the sheriff, is that people are very receptive to the idea of supporting our law enforcement. And I think the same is for other elected officials when the case can be made that they need this money. And so, as a county commissioner, I keep asking myself, why am I inside your line item in your budget? We should be talking about pies, taxes, and then the only other thing I would propose are penalties. That there's a certain amount of money that we can get. It comes from new growth, comes from fees, comes from interest, and it comes from taxes. There's a capacity. What I noticed is that we were getting a lot more asks than the capacity to even pay for it. And I think what we should be doing is trying to work together and saying, what are your asks? Okay, fine, here's your asks. Here's how much money is potentially out there, because there is a cap on how much money we can actually get. And then who wants to figure out how to make their budget work within that cap? And then they are the ones that are asking, in essence, this community to pay more in taxes for your needs. And if they're legitimate needs, then that shouldn't be a problem. But the Board of County Commissioners is not driving this budget. Now, some people would argue, well, our job is to set the budget. Fine. I really don't want to raise people's taxes. And a lot of times other commissioners don't want to raise people's taxes. So we can just say 0%, go figure it out on your own. But you have needs that have to be there. This community is growing, and sadly, growth doesn't pay for itself. And so the only way you're going to get that money to manage to the growth is through the tax process, until we can start getting meaningful impact fees into place. So one of the things that I had talked with the auditor about was how can we do this where we're actually working top down as opposed to bottom up. Bottom up meaning I'm looking at your line items, deciding if you should have so many reams of paper this year, or how many boxes of ammo should you be allowed to have to do your proper training. And instead, let's look at the money and figure out how much money there is, how much the electeds are asking for, and what that will lead to a tax increase. And then saying, here's your distribution of that pie. Come back with a budget that's balanced based upon what we're agreeing to here. And so it's a little different way of doing it. But the other side to this is that we cannot be in a situation where we go through the process to get a balanced budget today, and then come December, January, February, oh, I need more people, or my overtime has gone beyond what I put in my budget. Those mid-year asks need to stop. They need to quit happening. You know, we're only asking that people manage a budget and anticipate their future for 12 months. And these offices have been around long enough that we should have a good sense as to what the volume will be. And so the mid-year asks would actually work as a penalty for your next budget. So if you come back with a bunch of mid-year asks and the money happens to be there, that will impact your asks for the following year. And if we can start moving in a direction where we're working more together, you have more control over how you want to allocate your money, and can make the case to the community of what your needs are, and that your needs are driving the taxing process, not the board's, then we can work together to help solve some of these problems, because some of you have real problems in your own departments. And I think it's only fair that we as commissioners try to work with you to help solve those problems. But the public has to understand, and they have to know where this money is going to. And I don't see waste per se in the traditional sense in county government. I see inefficiencies that can be addressed, where we can start developing and monitoring and tracking more metrics so we can understand what is happening within the organization to make better decisions with the money. But I don't see it where people are actually wasting it on programs that aren't necessary as much, on extra trips, extra whatever P-card expenses that they shouldn't have. I don't see that. And I know we've talked a little bit about that too, Commissioner Duncan. But the efficiencies, I think there's a lot that can be had through the efficiencies. And so I want to just propose something that's a little different. What Brandy is going to talk about with at some point today with the steps, because we have a step that we're looking at trying to continue this year that we started last year, these automatic steps, the prospect of a COLA. And as elected officials, if we work together on that, whatever is left over, once we've talked about this, that is to be distributed among the electeds. And then you come back with a final balanced budget based upon that. And we talk about what that tax increase will be, if there even is one. And the only other comment I have is that we haven't been doing the kind of capital planning that I think we should be doing here to really anticipate the needs of replacing assets as well as expanding assets through growth. And the driver of that growth is not because we want to add more positions. The driver of that growth, quite simply, is because this community is growing. If we had a community of 50,000 people, we wouldn't need a jail the size that we have. But we do because of the number of people that are moving here. And it's attracting more and more people. Same thing with the number of desks or workstations where people interact with the public. I know when I first moved here, there was hardly ever a line in DMV, the registrations. You could pretty much walk right in, except the end of the month, right? Now it's pretty busy throughout the entire month, pretty busy. And that growth is the result of people moving here. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts about this?
Stan Mortensen, I have one. You know, I think in theory that this is good to discuss. However, with criminal justice, with crime, and I think the sheriff's in the same position my office will be in, and potentially probation and maybe the coroner. I can't speak for anybody, but I could have a balanced budget based on statistics in prior years and trends, but I can't predict when the next murder is going to happen. Or a Supreme Court rule change. And that's what's happened in my office. You know, last year I had a Supreme Court rule change, and it essentially obligated some of my staff members to work Saturdays and Sundays, and I didn't have the overtime budget for it. You know, when somebody kills their wife and I have to pay expert witnesses almost $200,000 to prosecute, that's going to blow the budget every time. And so, you know, that as good as this idea might be, and as many departments as it might work with, it's not going to stop mid-year requests for my office, just because there's so much unpredictability to it.
Well, I think if you have a situation where the Supreme Court has made a ruling, and that is an unanticipated event, I think that makes perfect sense. You know, no different than, you know, times where Dr. Duke has mentioned, what happens if we have a large event, right? These are anomalies. Of course, that's something that is different than the person who says, well, I've gotten busy and I need 2 more people, without any metrics behind it, without any real explanation except an anecdotal story of, we're busier now. And of course, there's always these exceptions and these unpredicted or unforeseen events. But the problem is that what happens is that the board is getting presented with these mid-year requests, which automatically increases their budget for the next year. It's not even an ask, it's an automatic ask, or it's an automatic incorporated in your budget. And I think that's what's happening, is it's putting us in this situation where we say, you know, well, we don't really want to raise taxes, so let's get into your line item and say, you know, do you really need another copier this year? I don't know what your copier looks like. I don't know how much it's being used, but I'm saying, no, not this year. You know, and that, I think, is where, you know, some of the problems are. If it's something that we don't want to try to figure out, then we can continue doing it the way it has been, which is everyone has an extreme need. You know, I've talked with many of you, if not all of you. The needs are extreme. How do I say your need is greater than his need, which is greater than his need? And so we can just, I'll take the machete out and I'll just start making the decisions for you. But I'd like to find a way where we can start working together on this, that if you need this money, that we can show this % of that increase went exactly to the prosecutor's office. And instead of me trying to explain why we raise taxes for you, we can now show it. And typically what I find is that when I talk to people about this stuff, they're very receptive to it when you can explain it to them. Like when I explain to people that you're so overwhelmed because we now understand your caseload, we've seen it numerically, and that you're at the point, or at least were at the point, of deciding whether or not to prosecute a misdemeanor. When people know that, they start to go, wait a second, we want to make sure your office has the resources it needs to do your job. And I think that's part of the issue, is that people see this money going into this vortex and they don't know where it's going. And so when they understand your challenges, and that's where the metrics really play a big role. You know, if Dr. Duke's office starts to have, you know, we're having these counts of activity, of transactions going through his office, we can start to make good decisions and we can explain to people what's going on. And so I agree with you that there's always going to be unforeseens, but I'd like to try to at least explore how we can do this and work together and get your department to where it needs to be to manage the workload. But over the long term, the trend is smoother. In the short term, it's always going to be like this. So I agree with you on that point.
Can I speak to, he said, like, expert witnesses? So we do have contingency money we levy each year for, and typically in the Justice Fund, Fund 15, we do about $300,000, and for the general fund, we do about $250,000. So that is something we do levy for unexpected witnesses or possibly rulings from the Idaho Supreme Court and changes.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things too. I think last year's budget we had, what, a $400,000 cushion.
That was for mid-year changes, but
yeah,
typically
$400,000 cushion for a $110 million budget. So we can increase the cushion for the unexpecteds.
But this is separate, though.
I understand.
Contingency.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
We were told to take it out of your budget. We didn't know about that.
Well, that's the point I'm going to clarify, is that that contingency account is under the exclusive control of
The BOCC, which takes 3 votes to do, not just 2, but 3.
So that additional flexibility that you're referring to is not within the purview of necessarily the elected official, but the sole discretion of the BOCC.
Yes.
I appreciate your, the route you're going, and I embrace that. One of the things that I need to better understand is two things. First, I want to hear the other commissioners speak to this, but the comparative decision of, okay, I want X, whether it's higher pay for my employees or it's an operational cost or a capital expenditure. Obviously, the wants that we all have or the needs that we have are going to exceed the actual taxing authority and the revenues. Okay, so there's going to be this comparative decision where my ask is going to be put up against Stan's, and which one's more important, which one's more valid, more critical. I think what you're saying is that's still under the purview of the commissioners. Or are we going to sit down and arm wrestle over it and figure out who gets...
Well, if we could monetize it, it might help solve some of our budgetary issues. But you're right. As far as dividing the pie up, yes, that sticks with the commissioners. I haven't met an ask yet that wasn't, if I don't, it being important. It wasn't. They were all important. You know, the problem I have is that how do I know what you really need versus what Stan really needs?
Correct.
And so,
that's the challenge.
That's right. And, you know, I don't know your job well enough, and I don't know Stan's job well enough to try to determine that. But ultimately, we're the ones tasked with asking to raise people's taxes, and we're the ones that ultimately bear that brunt. But if you need something that bad and you can make that case, and Stan needs something that bad and he can make that case, then we can at least say, okay, Stan's budget drew a 0.5% tax increase. Yours drew a 0.1% tax increase. And that was because of your ask, not because of my ask.
I get it.
Yeah. So, and that in essence...
That's why, you know, directionally, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think there's some details that we need to kind of really delve into, because I can speak from experience that the appetite of the treasurer's office is dwarfed by the appetite of the sheriff's. I mean, you guys are pretty healthy consumers of the budget, rightfully so, right? So
Actually, it's a lot leaner than many municipalities, but
well,
I think we're pretty.
And you're right. Like last year, for example, you know, we went through the exercise to show that we're actually spending millions on recruiting and training to lose them to other agencies. That other agencies actually fare better by paying their positions, their patrol positions, more than us, because we recruit and train, we go through that expense, and then they take them.
yeah, absolutely.
And so, you know, that's a basic business cost-benefit argument. So, yeah, last year, patrol gobbled up the lion's share of the tax increase, but it was actually to save money in the long run by spending money. And as you know,
I'm not challenging the reason or the rationale that you came to those conclusions. I'm just saying that there is going to be an unavoidable conflict there, competition for those dollars that are on the table.
absolutely. And that's where I think in the end, you know, and I know you can appreciate this probably more so than a lot of others, is that when we start getting into more data-driven, keeping track of our metrics, how many people are going through DMV? What is the average amount of time it takes to process somebody? What is your staffing level? How many are they handling per day? What is the reasonable number? You can start driving your decisions based upon that. Right now, I can say it's almost all anecdotally. When we get these asks for more money, I need it. You know, we're overwhelmed. We're dying back here. You know, well, that doesn't say anything. You know, and so yes, you're right. If we're going to have people competing for it, and in the end, the commissioners are going to be the arbiter of where that money goes.
Nothing, I can think of no better environment that I would like to operate in is if I, as the county treasurer, had an allocated portion of it. And for example, if I wanted to go ahead and reduce, let's say, operating expenses or even positions, reallocate those numbers to higher pay, I would like that authority to do it. But I do know that the inevitable conclusion is going to be, well, the commissioners are tasked for making sure it's going to be parity throughout the entire county. So what will happen is decisions that are made in my department, freeing up resources, are going to go to another very hungry operation. And I'm not just picking on the sheriff, because I think what his job is extremely important. But I don't know if I want to go down the path of constantly improving my operations to the benefit of others within the elected officials that I have no control in arbitrating or determining, okay, is that savings appropriately being redirected to another elected official?
Well, I would argue that you make a great point, first of all. And I think there's a difference between taking money that you're saving in your department and allocating it to another department for the sake of it. I think that what we have to ask ourselves is, are all the departments being properly funded so that they can do the job they're tasked with doing? If the answer is yes, then that money should be going back to the taxpayer. If the answer is no, then that money needs to go to those other departments to get caught up. And from what I've seen in the past year and a half, we've been woefully behind. Even 911 is a great example. I mean, we just paid them equal to Spokane, and they shut down the acceptance of new applications. They've gotten so many. And we were down so far. Same thing with Stan's office. We started paying the prosecutors a better wage. You've filled, what, 4 out of 5 positions since December?
Yeah,
in 6 months.
December, I filled 4 or 5 positions.
Yeah, I mean, that's, so that's how I would argue that this money needs to be allocated, not because you're actually doing really well with your budget and so there's extra money to just give. If there's any place it goes back to the people.
We agree on that.
Yeah. So the question is that I'm still going to be presented with the same decision, whether people start using more metric-driven asks or anecdotally driven asks. And I still have to decide, do you really need this, or is this what you want?
And I really agree with I think the direction that you're wanting to go is that if there are big asks by elected officials, they should be standing up there alongside the commissioners with you, explaining the big ask. So we're in total agreement there.
Yeah.
Do we have time to get just some feedback from the commissioners, or are you guys on the same page?
I think Brandy's going to do a presentation. Is it?
Well, did you want to have Commissioner Duncan and Brooks at least just chime in real quick after? By the way, that's 2 for 2 with you and me. We got the survey and we got the largely on this here, so we might get a trifecta today.
Bill, did you have something to add?
Always, but not necessarily at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. The thing is that different needs, especially if you're looking at capital, come up at different times. I mean, the percentages that are indicated here don't take into account the 9 million in jail pods, because that's never been part of an official adopted budget yet. And then, the coroner, he looks like he's just out of control because his percentage is huge, but it's 1.4 million for 1 year. So it's, the other thing too is when you're talking facilities, we have to add all these bodies in. So I think it's more complicated than just this, but I do like the idea of, elected officials trying to work with us a little bit better. And that's why I always say, come to me with your have-to-haves. Then I want, what are your wants, and then what is just the fluff? Because if some of those things really help, with retention and things like that, if they can save us money on the back end, then I want to consider them. But it's just not simple.
Look, the priority is very simple. I mean, do you have the tools you need to do your job? Yes, no. To do your job efficiently. Do you have the staff? Yes, no. And then, are we properly setting money aside for capital planning, capital budget? And then the last lowest on the priority is, are there tools out there that you would like to have? And I'm hard pressed to think we're ever going to really get there, only because we're not doing much in the way of capital planning. And to put it into perspective, last year we depreciated, what, 7 million of county assets? We're not really trying to find ways to replace that. So we can kick the can down the road, but everyone is going to have a capital request at some point in time. And so we should be thinking about that, because you know, the idea of being able to go out and get a bond is not that easy. And I still kind of stand by my words that if we didn't have this ARPA money that just kind of landed on our laps, you would be stacked too high in your office, Stan. The courts would be out of control. The judges would be stacked to 2, 3 in an office. And, you know, we'd have a lot of problems. It would only be getting worse. So I would argue that we at least think about that in our budgeting.
Could you put the plate?
Bill, you're not on mute. All right.
Yeah, I have a little different perspective. I think the first thing that we have to deal with is to have the right amount of people doing work. If you don't have people, you're going to have all the equipment you want or all the programs you want, but it doesn't happen. So people are number one. And then to attract employees and retain employees is the other side of that. You can have a lot of good employees and lose them in an instant when they start going to Spokane for better wages or Coeur d'Alene. And we've had that in the sheriff's office in spades. So I think it's important to prioritize. First we take care of people, then we take care of programs, then we take care of capital. That's my philosophy.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 is maintaining workforce salary step and COLA, and that is with our sheriff. I'm not sure what presentation you're talking about. We do have a 3 o'clock budget meeting, and so I'm not sure. We also have an 11 o'clock cancellation of taxes meeting, so just as long as everybody's aware, but I'll turn the floor.
Well, I thought that at the elected officials meeting, so the last budget meeting, you had said at this elected officials meeting, you would all discuss what you want to do for wages, and that I would incorporate that into my budget meeting this afternoon. So that's why I just have my stuff pulled up to show you the financial impact of the various COLA scenarios. That's what I was kind of expecting to hear discussed among the electeds.
And I guess my discussion item was that we need to maintain a workforce. The taxpayer in Kootenai County has invested a lot of money to retain sheriff's office employees. Right now, we are at a place that we haven't been in a long, long time. We're only 5 patrol.
Hey, Ferguson.
We're only 5 patrol deputies vacant right now, and we've never seen that in recent memory. So the taxpayer has made an investment, and we need to continue to make that competitive investment in our employees, or we're going to see the same cycles that we did years ago if we don't stay competitive. So I think it's important that we stay competitive. And I don't know anywhere in the nation where we have a 1% COLA, but wherever that is, I'd like to move there. So I'd like all of us have a constituency. I'd like for all of us to be considered stakeholders. Under a previous commissioner, you know, he continued to go around town saying that he holds the purse strings, and kept reminding everybody in this community that he's the one that gets to control the money. But we all have a constituency, and I believe that we are stakeholders in this community. So we'd like to have a conversation on it.
Well, Brandy will go through various different COLA scenarios and tax rate scenarios, and it kind of will show how it's working out right now, given the numbers that the electeds have provided her.
Right. So right now, currently, at a
This is going to get really complicated really fast. you just expressed a sentiment that I would prefer that everybody weigh in on, and that is just philosophically the cost of living adjustment. Is it appropriate? Yes or no? And then we can talk about some of the specifics, because I think, Jennifer, you've been researching maybe what reference points we should be using to determine what the actual cost of living adjustment should be to be in the right ballpark. But I would like kind of just some feedback from my fellow elected officials. How important is a cost of living adjustment to our employees? And then if you have some thoughts, ideas on what that reference cost of living ought to be, that would be great.
I, for one, think it's critical. I think it's critical for our employees because they're being financially hardship just like every other entity or individual out here. So I think it's really, really important.
Great.
Jill Smith, the treasurer.
Folks on the line, this is the elected officials meeting. It's running over, so I know that you are waiting for the cancellation of taxes. So if you could be patient and mute yourselves, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, from the standpoint of my employees, they definitely, the COLA is important to them.
From the prosecutor's office, 8 months ago, we were able to raise wages, and I've been able to fill nearly all of my vacant positions. I have somebody starting next week, I have somebody starting the week after, and I have somebody starting the week after that. And I've only got 1 or 2 empty spots after that, and between legal assistants and prosecutors and victim coordinators. What I'm trying to say is raising wages was paramount to my office being at a staffing level we haven't been in 10 years. And I'm afraid that if step increases and or COLA is not funded, we're going to revert back into the position I was in almost 2 years ago and that we've been in for a decade or more. And so I would just hate to slip back after the progress I've been able to make over the last 8 months. You know, even though we're paying better than we ever have, some of my prosecutors are just barely hanging on. You take a step increase away or you don't give a cost of living, that's all it's going to take for them to jump ship like they have been for the last decade or so. So, you know, I'm concerned what would happen if we don't fund steps and or COLA.
Bailiff Kovacs, assessor. We've heard from quite a few around the table this morning about the problems and the challenges that we've had in the past where we are not paying people the market rate. We've heard from our HR department about conducting a workplace culture survey to try and figure out why they're leaving, and I think we've learned they have the data on some of that, and some of that comes down to wages. And so I think it would be foolish to ignore cost of living because eventually that will come back to bite the county if we're not paying the market rate. So ultimately it comes down to the budget, comes down to what's written in statute. Title 31, Chapter 16, it's pretty straightforward. It comes down to the electeds and the department heads identifying what their needs are, presenting that to the commissioners, and then it comes down to the commissioners allocating and deciding. Should there be some sort of ranking, some sort of way to weigh it out, so to speak, in terms of priorities and how important it is? I believe that's a criteria that's in the commissioner's wheelhouse. But I do think cost of living is important. So.
Right. So I was doing some research last night, and I want to go back probably to 2020, and maybe Sylvia can help me with the wage study. I think we took the 2019 wage study and implemented it in 2020, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I think on top of that, we did a 2% COLA, just from what I was gathering from the data I saw.
Yes, I believe so, or 1 point something
Yeah.
1 year.
So, and then in 2023, we also did, was it wage study for 2022 that we implemented in 2023?
Correct.
Okay. So we did another wage study that was basically in 2022. We implemented that correction, we'll say, in 2023, plus a 6% COLA in fiscal year 23. And then in fiscal year 24, we had a 4.5% COLA. So in next year or this year, we're planning on trying to do that wage study and look at possibly seeing how we can implement that in fiscal year 26.
Correct.
Okay. So just looking at some trends, I looked at a few indicators. The first one being consumer price index for all urban consumers, and then you have one for the western states that we're looking at. And so that's the CPI-U. Mountain Western states is probably the one I was looking into detail last night. And so the trend that we're seeing in 2020, that was 1.5%. In 2021, I saw here 5.7%. 2022, 8.5%. 2023 was trending 3.5%. And 2024, we're only into, I think, the months coming in as of May, but the projections that people are looking at is about 3.2%. And then I looked at an estimate projection, and again, this isn't a very based on what you research, and that could range for that index 2 to 2.5% that I could find for data on there for increase for fiscal year 2025. And this is referring back to the COLA. And so, I mean, there's other trends too. You have this other personal consumption expenditure price index, kind of driven by the Federal Reserve and the markets. They look at that, and that's trending for an estimate data range for 2025 is between 2.2 to 2.5% COLA. So for me, we have the steps in the general pay plan, and I think they average between 2 to 5% depending where you are in that matrix. They basically are averaging, I think, about 4% in the beginning each year. And then you can look at the COLA too, and what I see, I think, trending right and being competitive until we do this wage study again, looking at a COLA from my perspective of what the research I did between 2 to 2.5%. So that's my input.
The big thing that I see is that we just have to keep our ears very close to the pavement on what, the rate should be to keep our people a market rate. We don't want to let people turn in their resignation and lose them because it's harder to keep them at that point. And it's not easy, but this is one of those things that each of us as electeds who at least have management or people reporting to us, we have to pay attention to that. And that's where getting good exit interviews and really getting into the meat of the issues as to why people are leaving can really help a lot. To do these across the board COLAs, I understand why we would want to do that, but we have to have something in place to reevaluate these positions to make sure that they don't become too rich. That we're not trying to make it too much nor too little. It's finding that right zone where we keep it. And looking at other indexes and things like that sounds great, but we do have some positions in this organization that we have not been able to fill for years and years. They've been open. We're trying. So there's a reason for that. And it's probably because the rate that we're offering is not enough to attract enough quality applicants to fill these positions. And so that's how I would approach this. If our positions are underpaid compared to what others are going to be, then we should be looking at a COLA. If they're going to be above what others are paying, then I would argue we're probably doing a little too much. But at the very least, we need to have a system in place where every 2 or 3 years, which I believe we have for these salary surveys, right?
Correct.
And hopefully we can all agree that the surveys should be looking at the places where our employees are going to and not necessarily other places that may have similar kinds of numbers, but we're not losing people. We're not losing people to Twin Falls. We're not losing people to Bend or anything like that. And just stay very, stay very close to where that number should be. I don't know where the number should be for each of your different positions. You know those numbers better. But I think collectively we could come up with a number across the board that would make sense.
This is the reason why I asked up front, kind of philosophically, how we all think about it. COLA is to keep everybody on pace with cost of living adjustments that are necessary. And then there's the steps, right, which is different. And I have to admit, I don't fully understand what that represents, and I think every commissioner I ask will probably have a different question, different answer. But I think I got an answer from everybody that there is an important need for a cost of living adjustment.
And you bring up a good point, because one of the things I've noticed in prior boards is that a COLA would be issued, and then the statement would be, well, you got a raise. I've never heard that before until I got associated with county government. The COLA is not a raise. So we just, the COLA is for the matrix. The steps, my original thought behind them was that the county went through these sporadic years where they just said, we're not going to fund a new step. But then we're going to do a COLA, so you got your raise. And the idea was that the steps were supposed to be representative of a progression, a time and grade, if you will, and a reward for doing good work. The COLA, I saw that more as every couple of years looking at that matrix and saying, are we out of whack with where we need to be, and should we adjust the whole matrix? The question is there enough money for these things? And, what's the public's appetite for it? And so...
I would argue that we have to have enough money for it, because if we don't, our employees are sliding backwards, and we'll in effect have destroyed all the good work we've done already. I would like to see some sort of a formula for a COLA, so anybody could say, okay, what's the price increase, the COLA for Social Security or whatever. I mean, there's a number of different ones you can use. Add them up and divide them by the number. That's the COLA. There's no judgment involved by any commissioner or group of commissioners. Nobody would sit here and say that the cost of living today here is the same as it was last year. It would just be ridiculous. And to say that it's 1% is equally ridiculous. And we have to fund that first, and then we have to fund the rest of the county government. And if that takes a tax increase, we need commissioners brave enough to say that takes a tax increase. And I say to people who don't want a tax increase, well, tell me what services you would gladly do without. And all of a sudden the room becomes silent. So I think a COLA is essential to getting and keeping the employees that we depend on.
Thank you.
Do you want me to go through the financial scenarios for every COLA options?
I'll just do it very quickly.
Okay, very quickly.
So we sent this out last night for you guys to look at. So she's going to walk through these scenarios.
So currently, with a 1% COLA and not cutting any open positions, at a 3% tax increase, you still have to cut $25,000 from the budget. Does that make sense? So you're still $25,000 in the hole if you take 3% and you do a 1% COLA across the county and you don't cut any open positions.
Brandy, can you tell us where you're looking?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go in the order of that PDF I sent you. So I'm on page 1 right now. Yep. So I'm on the far right at the very bottom. Do you see this negative $25,997? You see that?
And then the very left, you can see the changes in each page will be the COLA percentages and then the open position.
At the top, you can see that that's a 3% tax increase on the far right. So then if I go to the left, at a 2% tax increase, we would be $624,000 in the hole. So the less of a tax increase you take, the more in the hole you go in this scenario for a 1% COLA and not cutting open positions. Now I'm going to go to the second page, which again is a 1% COLA, but it includes cutting open positions that have been open longer than 100 days by 50%, which adds another $2.2 million back to the budget. So again, on the far right at the bottom, you can see that now we have $2.1 million in surplus. So again, at a 1% COLA across the county, plus cutting those open positions, open longer than 100 days by 50%. So then you're in the scenario here where you could actually go down and you could even do a 0% tax increase way over on the far left, and you'd still have $385,000 in surplus. So now you're just at the point where if you decide you are going to cut these open positions, then you have this surplus, and you need to decide how much of a COLA, if any, do you want to do? And with the surplus, do you want to put it towards capital, or do you want to do a lower tax increase? There's a variety of things you could do. So and then we're just going to go to the next page, 1.5% COLA, again on the far right, at a 3% tax increase, you have $1.8 million surplus. And it just goes down from there. Every page we go, higher the COLA, less the surplus. So a 2% COLA at a 3% tax increase, you have $1.5 million in surplus. Next page, 2.5% COLA, far right, down at the bottom, 3% tax increase, you have 1.1 in surplus. So does that make sense, that concept? The higher the COLA you go, you're just drawing down that surplus. So like I said, there's many different ways you could decide to do this. So you just need to decide COLA, yes or no, how much of a COLA, and if you have surplus, what are you going to do with it?
And what percentage of
And then-
tax increase the commissioners would like to take.
And again, if the board or electeds want to consider passing off some of the costs of the health insurance increase to the employees, that's also out there as well. I can go into more detail if you want, but I was trying to keep it quick.
Well, I think most of us are going to be here this afternoon, so we can continue this conversation then. But this gives a good start.
Just throwing it out there, would it be possible if the chief deputies of every office could do lunch today and talk about some things and make some recommendations for our, and maybe Jennifer would probably be useful if you could be there, and I know it's last minute, but is that?
Yeah, I can make time.
I mean, are you available?
Depending what time it is, sir.
Would that be something that we could do? And yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I think it's chief deputies you were asking for.
Yeah, or chief deputy. Yeah, chief deputies, or if you can't, yeah. Bela, is that we're good?
Dyson said good.
Probably not.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
Dyson said.
Well, I say we do it anyway, because I think that we need to make a recommendation should be made. Here's what we believe option 1, 2, and 3 would be, and then because this is going to be a lot to digest at our next meeting, so I'm thinking that's is that good? Okay. All right.
All right. Are you blind?
Maybe.
All right, I will call for public comment. Okay, hearing none, 11:19, meeting adjourned.